In police crime museums all over Europe, there are items of evidence that have brought some of the world's worst criminals to justice. Behind every object in these black museums is a fascinating and sometimes macabre story. In some murder cases, injuries inflicted on a victim are so distinctive that identifying the weapon that caused them and the owner of that weapon is often the key to solving the case. This proved disturbingly true in two murder cases from the 1940s. The first was known as the Wigwam murder, and it took place against the background of the Second World War. On the 7th of October 1942, Royal Marines were carrying out training manoeuvres on Hankley Common near Godalming in Surrey. One young Marine was stunned to come across a woman's foot sticking out of the ground. The Surrey police were notified, and they immediately called in Scotland Yard and its foremost forensic pathologist, Keith Simpson. The body was in a fragile state. Fingers and a thumb had been gnawed by rats, and the parts that were exposed were starting to decompose. Small remnants of heather flowers were found in a shallow grave. The flowering season for this particular plant finished in early September, indicating to Simpson that the body had lain there for 5 to 6 weeks. Marks on her feet and legs led Simpson to deduce that she had been dragged across the rough terrain to the grave. The presence of maggots also indicated that the body had been out in the open air, perhaps for 1 or 2 days before it had been buried. The victim was 5 feet 4 inches tall, with light brown hair that had been recently bleached. Teeth and bone x-rays put her age at between 19 and 20. Her front teeth had been knocked out, but they would have been prominent with a considerable overbite.
The injuries included 3 stab wounds to the head and a stab injury below the right elbow. Microscopical examination indicated that it had been inflicted while she was still alive. There was also a stabbing injury to the right hand, which showed that she had raised her hand to resist the attack. Simpson believed that these injuries had been caused by an unusual weapon. He noticed that a fragment of muscle had been torn from the injury to the right elbow, and a tendon had been hooked up from the stabbing wound of the right hand. He thought that the point of the weapon would have an unusual shape, rather like a parrot's beak.
At the back of the girl's skull was a large gap, with fissures branching out of it. The skull had been shattered by a single blow, very violent and certainly lethal. Simpson thought that a pole or a piece of branch may have caused this, and that the object would be 4.5 centimetres in diameter, the size of the gap. The famous Scotland Yard detective, Ted Greenough, was put in charge of the case. Greenough oversaw a police search of the area, and eventually officers found several important items, including a pair of women's shoes and a bag containing a piece of soap and a rosary. But most interesting was a large piece of birch that had been found in the same area. It had been cut into a stake, and when Keith Simpson measured it, its diameter was 4.5 centimetres. The stake was rough, and no fingerprints could be found on it, but one end of the wood was crushed, and embedded in it were hairs. They were an exact match with those from the dead girl's head. When a local police sergeant was given a description of a girl with prominent teeth and shambolic dress, it rang a bell. He believed it could be someone he had interviewed 6 or 7 weeks before the body was found. That girl was Joan Pearl Wolfe.
A strange creature. She was what they called a camp follower. She made herself and her sexual favours available to soldiers, a sort of amateur prostitute. But on the other hand, she was also, we're told, very devout and religious. She was only 19. She'd left home at the age of 16 after a row with her widowed mother, and since then she'd been living rough.
One of Joan's boyfriends, August Sangray, a Canadian soldier of part Native American ancestry, had built her a kind of wigwam. Sangray was 28, could neither read nor write. He had served time in Canada for crimes of theft and violence against a woman. Detective Inspector Greenough interviewed Sangray.
Sangray sat there for 5 days, spilling the beans. It was the longest statement ever made, 50-odd pages. Now, the policeman had really no right to do that.
Greenough also showed him Joan's soiled clothing, but didn't tell him that anything had happened to her. At the end of his statement, Sangray said to Greenough, "I guess you found her. Everything points to me. I guess I shall get the blame." During these 5 days, August Sangray had told Greenough a great deal about his relationship with Joan.
They'd met in a pub, in fact, and spent the evening together, drinks, laughs, rounded the evening off with sex. Well, hearing that Joan had nowhere to sleep and she was living rough, Sangre, employing the skills of a backwoodsman, built this shelter or shack in nearby woods, and the couple lived there. They also used a cricket pavilion at Thursley, a nearby village, for sex and shelter.
I have a letter here from Joan. She writes to Auguste from hospital where she's gone to be cleaned up. She says, "Dear Auguste, just 1 week has passed since I've known you, dear. It seems such a long time. I hope you'll try and come to see me, because you are all I have in the world." And that seems to me to place a tremendous burden on somebody that you met for only 1 week. She goes on, and this must have been a bombshell. And it does indicate that she or somebody has no idea of the mathematics of pregnancy. Anyway, she says, "I'm pretty sure we're going to have a tiny wee one."
Greeno cautioned Sangre, but there was insufficient evidence to hold him any longer. He questioned dozens of Canadian soldiers. Eventually, one stated that whilst out blackberry picking, he found a clasp knife stuck in a tree. It had a black handle and a hook on the tip of the blade. Nearby was a makeshift shelter. He'd handed the knife into the military police, who returned it to its owner, Auguste Sangre. Greeno now had the connection he needed, but still no knife. Further intensive searching of the common and the woods failed to locate it. Then, over a month later, there was an unexpected development. A drain in the guardroom wash house at the Whitley Army camp had overflowed, and one of the items found to be causing the blockage was the clasp knife.
Sangre's colleagues identified it as his. It was army issue, but the tip of the blade had been modified to end in a hook. It appeared that he had hidden the knife while waiting to be interviewed by police. Simpson inserted the knife into Joan Pearl Wolfe's reconstructed skull. The blade fitted perfectly into each of the 3 stabbing wounds. Simpson believed that twisting this blade would produce the same tearing that was evident in the other injuries.
Sangre, in fact, claimed that the knife wasn't his, it was Joan's, that she'd used it every day at the wigwam as a kitchen utensil. And Sangre also denied that the military police had returned it to him.
Ted Greeno was now convinced that Sangre was the murderer, and with Keith Simpson's help, pieced together the fatal attack.
Simpson thought it had begun in the dell, as her papers were around in that area, and that she'd been stabbed on the head and on the right elbow as she resisted the attack. He then thought that she had run downhill, screaming with pain, and tripped over a wire, which caused her to fall onto her face and fracture her teeth. She was then hit with a wooden stake across the back of the head, causing death immediately. The assailant then threw the wooden stake away, dragged her body into the bushes, and left her for a day or so. It was a very violent attack from beginning to end.
Why her body was then removed to a high-exposed site on the common and then dumped in a shallow grave remained a question. Both Greeno and Simpson thought it might have something to do with a Native American custom, burying one's enemy on a hilltop. Auguste Sangre's trial took place at Kingston Assizes.
Keith Simpson turned up at court to give evidence with poor Joan Wolfe's skull wrapped in a cardboard box.
Simpson used the bone-handled knife with a hook blade to show the court how it fitted perfectly into the wounds. When the jury retired to consider their verdict, they took skull and knife with them.
They were out for 2 hours before declaring that they had found Auguste Sangre guilty of murder. Despite this, they gave a recommendation of mercy. But the plea had little effect, and on the 29th of April 1943, Auguste Sangre was hanged.
The distinctive knife which had caused Joan's unusual injuries pointed without doubt to its owner, allowing police to charge a man who, without this vital evidence, would have walked free. Our second case involved the violent and sadistic murders of 2 young women in 1946. The marks left on one of them were very distinctive. Detectives knew that finding the weapon was an essential element in solving the case.
On the afternoon of Friday, the 21st of June, a member of staff at a London hotel entered a room that had been locked all day and needed cleaning. Opening the curtains, she saw that one of the beds wasn't empty. It appeared that someone was asleep under the covers, but when she pulled back the bedclothes, lying before her was a woman's dead body. Police and the highly respected pathologist, Dr. Keith Simpson, was soon at the scene. The room was undisturbed. The woman's clothes were folded neatly on a chair, and her handbag stood beside them. It contained a wartime identity card, which showed her to be one Marjorie Gardner.
When Keith Simpson examined her body, he saw that her injuries were appalling. Both breasts had been attacked. She had severe vaginal injuries. Keith Simpson thought this was caused by an instrument. But most important were the lash marks on her body.
There were 17 in all, and they showed a diamond pattern weave. Simpson later wrote that if ever he saw a murderer's signature on his handiwork, it was the imprint of that whip. If they found the whip, they'd have their man.
These injuries, however, were not the cause of her death. She died as a result of suffocation. Either, Simpson thought, from a gag or from her face being pushed into the pillow. He gave the time of death as about midnight or the very early hours of the day of which she was found.
Marjorie Gardner worked occasionally as a film extra and was known to the police. The hotel register showed that the room had been booked 5 days before by a man signing himself Lieutenant Colonel N.G.C. Heath. He had been in the company of a young woman who he had signed in as his wife.
The so-called Lieutenant Colonel was soon identified as Neville George Cleveley Heath, a 29-year-old petty criminal. He was good-looking, with striking blue eyes and a military air. The description was circulated to forces around the country, as well as the press.
3 days after Marjorie Gardner's body was found, Scotland Yard received a letter. It was from Neville Heath. Sir, I feel it is my duty to inform you of certain facts in connection with the death of Mrs. Gardner at Notting Hill Gate. It went on to describe how Heath had found the body when returning late to the hotel after lending his room to a friend. In a panic, he said he ran away. The letter was postmarked Worthing, but Heath had already moved a little further along the coast to Bournemouth.
When Neville Heath was walking along the promenade in Bournemouth here, in fact, to everybody else in Bournemouth at that time, he was Group Captain Rupert Brooke. He was walking along there about 2:45 and engaged himself in conversation with 21-year-old Doreen Marshall, the daughter of a company director from Pinner in Middlesex.
If Doreen had read the papers, she would have been aware that police were looking for a man in connection with Marjorie Gardner's murder. But as there had been no accompanying photograph, she couldn't have guessed that her charming captain was anything other than what he said. Doreen accepted his offer of tea, and the pair went back to his hotel. Doreen agreed to meet up for dinner.
During the course of the dinner, there must have been something about Brooke's behaviour which agitated Doreen, because she asked another guest in the hotel to order a taxi for her. But in fact, Brooke himself soon afterwards cancelled the taxi and insisted on walking her back himself. And as they left the hotel that evening, he said to the porter, "I'll be back in half an hour." But Doreen corrected him and said, "No, in a quarter of an hour."
The story then really moves on to the Friday, when the manager of the Norfolk Hotel was getting worried because Doreen hadn't reappeared. He informed the police. He also rang the Tollard Royal. The manager of the Tollard Royal said to Heath, "There's a lady, answering to your lady's description, reported missing. I suggest perhaps you should contact the police." And rather surprisingly, Heath said, "Right, yes, I will."
At the police station, Heath, still masquerading as Group Captain Brooke, was shown a photo of Doreen Marshall and admitted that she was the girl he had dined with. He told Detective Constable George Souter that he had left her at her hotel and then walked back along the seafront to his own. As Heath was speaking, George Souter noticed scratch marks on his neck and thought that he had seen his face before. He checked the photo of the man wanted for the murder of Marjorie Gardner.
He then said to Heath, "Brooke, is your name Heath?" And Heath said, "Oh, no. And then Souter said, "Well, your picture in the papers, it does look like you." And Heath said, "Yes, people have remarked on that." And he rather gave himself away then because his picture hadn't appeared in the papers, only in the Police Gazette.
Heath's luck was rapidly running out. He had walked round to the police station in his shirt sleeves and now complained of the cold. A policeman was dispatched to his hotel to fetch his jacket. In the pocket, police discovered a cloakroom ticket and a return train ticket from Bournemouth to London, issued in the name of Doreen Marshall.
The Bournemouth police now discovered that Heath had pulled a ring and a crystal fob watch belonging to Doreen. Faced with this, Heath, now finally admitting his true identity, sat down and wrote out a statement. In it, he described an American man who he said Doreen had spoken about and who he thought could be responsible for her disappearance.
Neville Heath was the son of a barber from Ilford in Essex who Scrimson saved to send his son to private school, but he repaid it by getting himself many charges which landed him in Borstal.
On the outbreak of war, Heath joined the forces, but was soon in trouble. During his army career, he was court-martialed 3 times.
Up to this point, Doreen was still a missing person, but 4 days after Heath had walked into the police station, the mystery was solved. A young woman out walking a dog at Branksome Dean Chine had noticed a mass of flies swarming around some bushes. Hidden there was the body of Doreen Marshall.
They found the body very mutilated. It was naked, apart from one shoe, and clothing strewn all around, so it appeared that the actual sexual assault took place actually in the Chine.
Like Marjorie Gardner, Doreen Marshall had been subjected to a frenzied attack. Her breasts had been mutilated and her throat cut. As Simpson later wrote, she'd undoubtedly been dead from hemorrhage when the murderer further mutilated her body.
The game was up for Heath. The cloakroom ticket from his jacket pocket was exchanged for a suitcase, which contained clothes stained with blood that was later found to be a perfect match with that of his first victim, Marjorie Gardner. But most importantly, it contained the weapon that police had searched for, the distinctive leather whip. The diamond weave on the whip was an exact fit with the bloody indentations on Marjorie Gardner's body. Heath was charged with the murders of both women. Doreen Marshall's father was appalled that no pictures of the man wanted for the murder of Marjorie Gardner had been issued to the press. He believed that if this had happened, then his young daughter would still be alive. Heath's trial began at the Old Bailey on the 24th of September 1946. At that time in English law, a person could only be tried for one murder at a time. The Crown decided to prosecute Heath for the murder of Marjorie Gardner. Heath's lawyer, the celebrated J.D. Caswell KC, wrote in his memoirs that he believed Heath to be truly insane. He thought him an impassioned, immoral sadist. In fact, it appeared that the murder of Marjorie Gardner had begun as sadomasochistic sex, for it came out that Marjorie enjoyed being whipped and almost lost her life a month before her murder, when in another hotel bedroom, she and Heath had been interrupted by a concerned security guard.
It was reported that Marjorie Gardner was badly lashed, and Heath was standing over her in a fiendish fashion. English courts, however, weren't ready for such revelations. Caswell knew that Heath's only alternative was a plea for insanity. He also knew that this was very difficult to establish. The question the jury had to ask themselves was, did Heath know what he was doing? And if he did he know it was wrong? The jury took just under an hour to return the verdict. Guilty. Heath stood to attention as the judge passed the death sentence.
Although he was an awful sadist, he had some very moving letters to write when he was in the condemned cell to his mother. "My only regret at leaving the world is that I've been so damned unworthy of you both. I shall probably stay up reading tonight because I'd like to see the dawn again."
Heath accepted the traditional glass of whiskey to steady the nerves, famously adding, "While you're about it, you might make that a double." Neville Heath was executed on the 26th of October 1946 at Pentonville Prison. In both the Wigwam murder and the Heath case, the murderers left identifying marks that were as distinctive as a signature. These marks, and the strange weapons that caused them, eventually served to seal the killer's fates.